What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to another video. It's Austin from P&W Bassin here, and today I am teaming up with Monster Bass to talk about the Scott Martin frog and pretty much just give you a bunch of tips that are going to help you guys become better frog fishermen. Now, make sure you stay to the very end of the video because I'm going to be giving you guys 2 tips that are going to help your frog fishing stand out against all other frog fishermen. So make sure you guys stay to the end of the video to get those tips. But other than that, let's get straight into the video. All right, guys, right before we jump into the tips for this video, I wanted to let you guys know that these are the tips that I personally used myself to help catch more fish on a frog. I just wanted to let you guys know that so that you will be confident with these tips, and I promise you, if you use these tips, you will catch more fish on a frog. All right, guys, so the first thing I do when I pull a frog out of its package is I trim the legs. Now, as you can see here on this frog, the legs are already trimmed, and they are trimmed at different levels. Now, I do this because it actually helps the walking action of the frog, and it makes it a lot easier to walk it. Usually when you get a frog right out of the package, the legs are really long, and don't get me wrong, you still can catch fish on those legs. I just found it easier to catch fish when I trim them up a little bit, just like that. And really, you get to determine the length of the legs. A lot of people get really worried, like I don't want to cut them too short, I don't want to keep them too long. Well, I've seen guys cut them very short, still catch fish on them, and I've seen guys leave them the way they are out of the package and still catch fish. It really comes down to your personal preference and really what makes it easier for you to walk the frog or even just catch more fish on the frog. So that's tip number 1 for you guys. The second thing I do before fishing with the frog is I actually bend the hooks out a little bit. Now, not everybody does this because when you bend the hooks out, it actually makes the frog less weedless. You know, when you guys are using a frog, you are throwing it in the very thick pads and weeds, kind of like this behind me here. But one thing I like to do just to help with hookup ratio is grab those hooks and bend them just a little bit, just so they're very slightly pointed up, and just that little movement of the hook will help you guys hook up with more fish. So I just grab it, just pull it up just like that, just a little bit. Now, you don't want to go too much or else it's really going to be hard to use it in the weeds, but just that little movement of the hook really helps you guys hook up with more fish. All right, guys, so now that we have made our own modifications to the frog, it's time to throw that frog out there and start catching fish. Now, when you talk about retrieval, there is so many different options that you can do while fishing with one of these Scott Martin frogs, poppin' frog, any frog. One of my favorite is to actually walk the frog, and it's a really cool trick that really just get those fish to bite. It works because a lot of the time that frog is not moving too fast. It seems like it's moving fast because it's moving a lot of water, but the frog is almost staying in the same spot, walking back and forth. And when those fish see that right above their head, a lot of the times they cannot help but just eat that frog. So that is the first retrieval option that you have, is just walking the frog back and forth. And you kind of just gotta pop your rod on slack line, because if you pop it when there's no slack in the line, it's pretty much just gonna come towards you in a straight line, which is not too bad because that's actually retrieval number 2, is to just sit there and pop. Just sit there, keep popping it over the weeds. You know, if those fish are really active, they're gonna bust up on that frog. And it just, especially with that popping nose that the Scott Martin frog has, you might think that the fish are not gonna eat it because it's moving so fast, but don't hesitate to do that because these fish are way faster than you think, and that action sometimes just gets them to blow up. Third retrieval that I like to do, and usually it's not with a poppin' frog, but every now and then I still do it. If it's really thick weeds, grass mats, it just depends on the situation. I like to just reel it slowly. I don't know what it is, but sometimes just reeling that frog really slow across the top of the water, no popping action, the fish just love. You kind of just have to figure out which retrieval that the fish want that specific day. One cast, you'll do a steady retrieve. The other cast, you're gonna walk it. And then the next cast, you can just pop it really fast like I was saying before. And just use all these different methods of retrieval, and eventually you're gonna find out what those fish want on that specific day. All right, guys, now this tip is unbelievable, and I absolutely love it. And it's actually the technique that I used to catch my very first frog fish. I learned this tip from Bama Bassin. You know, he is huge into frogs down in Alabama, catches some giants on frogs. And One tip that I learned from him while kind of picking up a frog at first was to give it a dangle. I know you guys have heard that term before, and that's when you just cast a frog over a limb on purpose. And what that does, it pretty much has the frog hanging in the air right above the water. Hop it up and down in the water to give it a few splashes, and a lot of the times those fish just blow up on that frog as it's over the limb. So you got to give it a second before you set the hook and just crank them. Set that hook as hard as you guys can, because it's going to be tough to get them over that limb sometimes, especially if you guys hooked a pig. And that technique just kills it sometimes. If those fish are really up shallow, or if you got some overhanging trees, when you give that frog a dangle, sometimes I swear they just cannot resist it. So one of the tips you guys heard while I was talking about giving the frog a dangle was you want to wait, because a lot of the times they might just grab the tail. Well, if you set the hook while they have the tail or the legs, you're not going to get those fish. Sometimes I like to wait 3 seconds. I know it's probably one of the hardest things in the world, especially for me to do, because you get so excited when that fish just blows up on that frog. But I swear, if you guys wait just a few seconds, you're gonna have, your hookup ratio is gonna be way better. So that is a huge tip that I cannot stress enough, is to wait. So before we get too far into the video, I actually want you guys to comment down below what are some special things that you guys do to your frogs, or some things that you do to catch more fish on a frog. Let us know in the comments below, because I would love to hear some of your guys' strategies. Now that we have talked about really how to use the frog and the techniques that I like to use, we're gonna talk about where to use the frog. Now, obviously you guys know that you wanna use them on pads. It's a little bit more detailed than that sometimes. I know some lakes are absolutely covered in pads, and you can kind of get overwhelmed, like I can't cast to every single spot on this lake. A lot of the times you have to key in on little things. So say if you got a pad line that's just going straight across like this, and then all of a sudden it comes out to a point. Well, I like to cast right in the back pocket of that point. I like to cast on the tip of the point and on the other back pocket. And a lot of those times the fish love to key in on those weird changes in the pads. So say if there's like a log sticking out of the pads, well, cast to that log, because a lot of the times just that little difference in the pads are gonna hold those fish. Anything that you notice is different than the ordinary, cast to it. Now, you will still catch fish in the ordinary spots, don't get me wrong, but I love to key in on those little differences. And frogs are great for lily pads, they're great for, you know, low cover hanging trees. I've actually fished frogs under docks as well, and you know, not a lot of people do that. So if you try fishing a frog under a dock, you might even catch more fish, because that might be something that the fish under that dock hasn't seen before. You know, they've probably seen 1,000 jigs, they've probably seen 1,000 Senkos, Texas rigs, all of that. But if you fish a frog under a dock, that might help you guys get more blow-ups. All right guys, so now that we have covered everything about the frog and what you'll need to know to catch more fish, I've been waiting for this the entire video, and that is to show you guys the 2 secret tips that I use to really enhance my frog fishing. So stay tuned, because these tips are gonna help you guys really stand out from any other frog fisherman. So tip number 1, a lot of the times if you're fishing a frog and you're in the really thick weeds, sometimes you can't get that frog far enough back into the weeds to where the juice is. I have figured out a trick that you can use to cast the frog almost 2 times as far. And I'm gonna show you guys that tip right now. All you have to do is squeeze your frog. That's step number 1. Squeeze your frog, place your frog underwater. All right, so what that has done is that has just put a bunch of water in your frog. Look. That's quite a bit of water. And with water comes the weight. So once you add all that water weight in your frog, you are able to cast so much further. Like I'm talking 2 times as far. And a lot of the times that distance really helps. You might be fishing weeds that are so thick and you can't even get back in them with your boat. So sometimes this tip really helps you guys catch more fish, because it gets into the places where not many other people can cast. And what's cool about this is usually you don't want water in your frog because it sinks it. Well, if you start with the water in your frog and you cast it as far as you can, by the time it hits the water, all the water that was in the frog is already out, and your frog is gonna be floating just fine, and you're gonna be back in the juice where nobody else can get. So I want you guys to try this tip, and if it helps, you know, let me know. DM me on Instagram at PNW Bassin, and we can talk about some more frog fishing tips. And I would love to see that tip worked for you guys. All right guys, there's one more tip that I want to show you, and here it is. Now, a lot of the time the frogs are pretty silent. You know, you have those walking baits that have those rattles in them, just chick, 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 and it sounds really good, and it actually triggers those fish to bite sometimes. Well, one thing that I have found is to put rattles in your frogs. You know, I don't have any rattles with me right now, and I can't believe I did this for this video, but I left my frog box at home, so I don't have any of my frogs to show you this. But all you do is you take that little plug out of the frog right there, and you just take any beads that you have and put them in your frog, and you close that back up, you know, maybe put some super glue on it, and that frog is gonna rattle. And a lot of the times that rattle just triggers those bites. And it just depends on the day, like I was saying, but if you use those rattles, a lot of the times it's gonna trigger bites, and not many people have rattles in their frog. It's gonna help your bait stand out against all other frog fishermen. So if you guys like these tips on frog fishing, I want you guys to click right here so you guys can learn more techniques that are gonna help you become better bass fishermen. And while you're at it, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you guys so much for watching. See you in the next video.